Picture this. It's 5 a.m. The world is still sleeping, but you're awake. Not because you have to be, but because you chose to be. There's something sacred about these early hours, isn't there? The quiet, the stillness, the feeling that you're getting a head start on life itself. But here's what I've learned after years of experimenting with my morning routine, and trust me, I've tried everything from meditation apps to ice-cold showers. The real magic of early rising isn't about becoming some superhuman productivity machine. It's about reclaiming something we've lost in our rush through life, the ability to start each day with intention rather than urgency. If you've ever felt like you're always playing catch-up, like your days are happening to you instead of with you, then what we're exploring today might just change everything. I'm Tony, and I create spaces where life slows down long enough for you to remember who you really are. Today, we're diving deep into why that 5 a.m. wake-up call could be the gentlest revolution you never knew you needed. Now, I know what you're thinking, Tony. I can barely make it to bed at a reasonable hour, and you want me to wake up at 5? I get it. I used to think morning people were some kind of genetic anomaly, like people who actually enjoy kale, or those who never lose their car keys. But here's the thing. The early morning advantage isn't about being a morning person. It's about creating space for your soul to breathe before the world demands your attention. Let me share something that might surprise you. The most successful people I know, and I'm not talking about the hustle culture, burn yourself out kind of success, they all have one thing in common. They've discovered that how you start your week, particularly your Monday morning, sets the tone for everything that follows. It's like tuning an instrument before a concert. Get the first note right, and the whole symphony flows. So here's what we're going to explore together. First, we'll look at what really happens to your mind and body when you claim those early hours. Then, we'll tackle the biggest myths and challenges around early rising, because let's be honest, there are some real obstacles here. Next, I'll share a simple framework for turning your early mornings into a purposeful week planning ritual. And finally, we'll talk about making this sustainable, because the last thing you need is another self-improvement project that burns out after 2 weeks. The first thing you need to know about waking up early is that it's not really about waking up early at all. It's about waking up to yourself. When you rise before the rest of the world, you're not just gaining time, you're gaining something far more precious. Mental clarity. Think about it. When do you usually get your best ideas? When you're rushing to a meeting? When you're scrolling through your phone? When you're stuck in traffic? Probably not. Most of us get our clearest thoughts in the shower, on walks, or in those quiet moments right before sleep. The early morning is like an extended version of that clarity. It's your mind's natural state before the noise begins. There's actual science behind this. Your brain produces alpha waves in the early morning, the same waves associated with creativity and calm focus. It's like your mind is naturally optimized for deep thinking and intention setting during these hours. But here's what most productivity gurus won't tell you. This isn't about squeezing more tasks into your day. It's about creating space for the kind of thinking that actually matters. I remember reading about a study where researchers found that people who wake up early report 25% less decision fatigue throughout the day. 25%. That's not because they're superhuman, it's because they've already made their most important decisions when their minds are clear. They've already connected with their priorities before the world started pulling them in a dozen different directions. But let's talk about what this really means for your life. When you start your day with morning optimization, you're not just improving your productivity, you're improving your relationship with yourself. You're saying, I matter enough to give myself this gift of time. And that shift in self-respect, that changes everything. Here's what I wish someone had told me when I first started experimenting with early rising. You're not trying to become a different person. You're trying to become more yourself. The person who has time to think. The person who moves through the day with intention instead of reaction. The person who remembers their dreams, both the sleeping kind and the waking kind. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Maybe you're thinking, this sounds great, Tony, but I'm not a morning person. I've tried this before, and it never sticks. Or maybe you're worried about social commitments, family obligations, or just the simple fact that you really, really love your sleep. Here's something that might surprise you. The whole morning person versus night owl thing? It's not as fixed as you think. Yes, we all have natural circadian rhythms, but they're far more flexible than we've been told. I used to be someone who did my best work at midnight, who felt most creative after 10 p.m. I thought that was just who I was. But what I discovered was that I wasn't actually more creative at night. I was just more alone with my thoughts. The early morning gave me that same solitude, but with the added benefit of starting my day from a place of clarity rather than ending it there. The biggest myth we tell ourselves is that changing our sleep schedule requires some kind of superhuman discipline. But here's the truth. Sustainable change happens in tiny increments. We're not talking about going from midnight to 5 a.m. overnight. We're talking about shifting your schedule 15 minutes at a time. Just 15 minutes. That's one song, one short meditation, one cup of coffee enjoyed in silence. But let's get real about the challenges. Maybe you have young kids who wake up at all hours. Maybe you work late shifts. Maybe you have a social life that just doesn't align with early bedtimes. These are real considerations, and anyone who tells you that discipline conquers all is selling you something you don't need. Here's what I've learned from talking to hundreds of people about their morning routines. The ones who make it work long-term aren't the ones with perfect circumstances. They're the ones who focus on the feeling they want to create, not the exact time on the clock. Maybe your early morning is 6 a.m. instead of 5. Maybe it's 7 a.m. on weekends. Maybe it's just 10 minutes of stillness before the chaos begins. The magic isn't in the hour, it's in the intention. And here's something that might help with the resistance. You don't have to love mornings to love what mornings can give you. I never learned to love the sound of my alarm at 5 a.m. But I did learn to love the feeling of sitting with my thoughts while the world was quiet. I learned to love the sense of having already won the day before it officially began. The key to overcoming that initial resistance isn't more willpower, it's more curiosity. Instead of asking yourself, how can I force myself to wake up earlier? Try asking, what would it feel like to start my day from a place of calm instead of chaos? That shift in focus changes everything. Quick question for you. When was the last time you started your week feeling genuinely excited about the days ahead? Not anxious, not overwhelmed, not just hoping to survive until Friday, but actually excited? If you can't remember, you're not alone. Most of us have gotten so caught up in reacting to our weeks that we've forgotten how to create them. This is where the real power of early rising reveals itself. It's not just about personal productivity. It's about weekly planning that comes from a place of wisdom rather than panic. When you wake up early, especially on Monday mornings, you're not just gaining time, you're gaining perspective. You're creating space for what I call purposeful week thinking. Here's a simple framework that's changed how I approach my weeks, and it might just change yours too. I call it the 3 questions method, and it takes about 10 minutes of your early morning time. Question 1. What do I want to feel at the end of this week? Not what do I want to accomplish, not what do I need to get done, but what do I want to feel? Maybe it's proud, maybe it's peaceful, maybe it's connected. This isn't about goal sets, about the emotional experience you want to create. Question 2. What would need to happen for me to feel that way? This is where your weekly priorities start to reveal themselves. If you want to feel proud, maybe you need to finally have that difficult conversation you've been avoiding. If you want to feel peaceful, maybe you need to say no to that extra commitment. If you want to feel connected, maybe you need to schedule real time with the people who matter most. Question 3. What's the smallest first step I can take today? This is where intention meets action. Not the biggest step, not the most impressive step, but the smallest one. Because here's what I've learned. Momentum is built on small, consistent actions, not grand gestures that burn out after a week. The beauty of doing this kind of weekly visualization in the early morning is that your mind is still open, still connected to possibility rather than limitation. You're not yet caught up in the reality of your calendar or the weight of your obligations. You're working with your dreams, not despite them. And here's something else that happens when you start your week with this kind of intention setting. You begin to notice patterns. You start to see which activities actually align with how you want to feel, and which ones are just habitual noise. You develop what I call gentle discipline, the ability to make choices that serve your deeper self, not just your immediate impulses. I remember one woman telling me that this simple weekly ritual helped her realize she'd been saying yes to everything out of fear, not generosity. Another person discovered that his Sunday scaries completely disappeared when he started approaching Monday as a fresh canvas rather than a prison sentence. These aren't dramatic transformation stories, they're quiet shifts that ripple through entire lives. But here's what I want you to remember. This isn't about perfect planning or having all the answers. It's about showing up for yourself consistently, especially when you don't feel like it. Your early morning routine isn't a performance. It's a practice. And like any practice, it gets easier and more natural over time. Now, let's talk about the part that usually trips people up, making this sustainable. Because I know you've probably tried morning routines before. Maybe you've downloaded apps, bought planners, set multiple alarms. Maybe you've even had some success for a few weeks before life got in the way. Sound familiar? Here's the thing about sustainable habits. They're not built on motivation. They're built on systems that work even when you don't feel like it. The most successful early risers I know don't wake up excited every single morning. They wake up because they've created conditions that make it easier to get up than to stay in bed. Let me share what I call the gentle approach to morning rituals. Instead of trying to create the perfect morning routine, start with something I call morning anchors. These are tiny, non-negotiable things that signal to your brain that the day has begun with intention. Maybe it's making your bed. Maybe it's drinking a glass of water. Maybe it's taking 3 deep breaths before you check your phone. The key is that these anchors are so small, you can't fail at them. You're not trying to meditate for 30 minutes, journal for 20 minutes, and exercise for an hour. You're just trying to create a moment of consciousness between sleep and the demands of the day. Here's what one of my anchors looks like. I make my coffee, and while it's brewing, I stand by the window and name 3 things I'm grateful for. Not write them down, not share them with anyone, just acknowledge them quietly. It takes maybe 90 seconds, but it shifts me from unconscious routine to conscious choice. That's it. That's the whole thing. And here's what happens over time. Those small anchors start to expand naturally. You might find yourself wanting to sit with your coffee a little longer. You might notice that you enjoy the quiet so much that you start waking up 5 minutes earlier without even trying. You might discover that this small ritual actually gives you more energy, not less. The trap that most people fall into is trying to optimize their mornings like they're running a business. But your morning routine isn't a productivity hack, it's a love letter to yourself. It's a daily practice of showing up for your own life with curiosity and kindness. And let's be honest about something else. There will be days when you don't wake up early. Days when you hit snooze. Days when life gets in the way. Days when you just need the extra sleep. That's not failure, that's being human. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is gentle consistency. The goal is creating a practice that serves you, not one that judges you. Here's something I want you to try if you're feeling curious. Tomorrow morning, don't try to wake up at 5 a.m. Don't try to revolutionize your whole life. Just try this. Set your alarm 15 minutes earlier than usual. When it goes off, don't reach for your phone. Instead, lie there for just a moment and ask yourself, how do I want to feel today? Then get up and do one small thing that honors that feeling. Maybe it's making your bed with intention. Maybe it's stepping outside and taking 5 deep breaths. Maybe it's writing down one thing you're looking forward to. That's it. That's the whole experiment. No pressure, no judgment, just curiosity. Because here's what I've discovered. The early morning advantage isn't about what you do with the time. It's about who you become when you give yourself the gift of starting each day consciously rather than reactively. You know what's interesting? The people who stick with early rising long-term rarely talk about productivity anymore. They talk about peace. They talk about feeling like they're living their lives instead of just surviving them. They talk about having time to remember their dreams, both the sleeping kind and the waking kind. That's the real advantage we're after here. Not more hours in the day, but more life in the hours. Not more tasks completed, but more presence with the tasks that matter. Not more efficiency, but more intentionality. So as we wrap up, let me ask you this. What would it feel like to start tomorrow from a place of calm instead of chaos? What would it feel like to approach your week as a canvas rather than a cage? What would it feel like to give yourself the gift of time before the world demands your attention? You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to commit to a perfect routine. You just have to be willing to experiment with treating yourself like someone worth showing up for. Because you are. You're worth the early morning stillness. You're worth the gentle discipline. You're worth the purposeful week that starts with a conscious choice to rise. If something in today's conversation stirred something in you, I'd love to hear about it. Leave a comment and share one small thing you're curious about trying in your mornings. Maybe it'll inspire someone else who's thinking about making this shift. And remember, you're not trying to become someone else. You're just trying to become more yourself, the version of you that has time to think, space to breathe, and moments to remember what really matters. I'm Tony, and your story is just getting deeper. The early morning is waiting for you, not with demands, but with possibilities. All you have to do is show up.